Hello, everyone. Aloha from Hawaii. I'm Dexter Mark, and I'll be your host for the Bloom-Futaba Memorial Lectures. Thank you for participating in the 21st annual presentation. The first, then named Futaba Memorial Lectures, was held in the year 2000 and featured a new professor from Musashino University in Tokyo, whose name was Ken Tanaka. He spoke on American Pure Land Buddhism at the dawn of a new millennium. Okaide, welcome home to the Bloom-Futaba series, Professor Ken. The 2020 Bloom-Futaba Memorial Lectures is the first online version and offers the opportunity to share the teachings not only in Honolulu, but globally. Konnichiwa to our viewers in Japan, and Ola to our viewers in Brazil. Hello to the mainland USA, Canada, and throughout the Hawaiian Islands. This year, through technology and the opportunity of the COVID-19 pandemic, we can share Tanaka Sensei's insights with a much broader audience. Thank you all for managing to log into this Zoom meeting. For first-timers, it may be a bit daunting to find out where the controls are. I will mute everyone except Dr. Tanaka. So please type your questions and comments in the chat section. You'll find the chat button in your black control panel. Please send your questions and comments via chat at any time, and we will select questions from there during questions and answers. Chat messages will only be sent to Dr. Tanaka and myself and will not be viewable by everyone. Professor Tanaka will also be fielding live questions from the audience during the Q&A, and he will manage the selection and unmuting of the participants. Please wave your hand vigorously in front of your face to indicate that you have a question or comment, or you can use the chat message to say that you want to say something. The format for today will be about 60 minutes of presentation by Dr. Ken, followed by about 30 minutes of Q&A, and then a 15-minute break for home refreshments, etc. Then a repeat. After the close of the session, we'll have an additional 30 minutes of what in Hawaii we call pauhana time, which means when work is done, there is a continuing gathering. And so for those of you that want to remain and chat with Dr. Tanaka, you'll have that chance after our 4:15 closing. This presentation will be available on YouTube by August 1st. So if you need to break away, portions or the entirety can be viewed at a later time. Please bear with me as we learn how to produce these types of educational programs and the technology required. Zoom was selected for its popularity and its general ease of use. Of course, we must acknowledge the convener of this program, Mrs. Dorothy Bloom, wife of the originator, Dr. Alfred Bloom. We also want to thank the Futaba Memorial Lecture Fund, the University of Hawaii Foundation Nalander Fund, the Hompa Honganji Hawaii Betsuin Temple, and of course my life partner, Faye Mar. Dr. Kenneth Kenshin Tanaka is a professor emeritus, Musashino University in Tokyo. He retired in 2018 after 20 years as a professor of Buddhist studies. He graduated from Stanford University, the Institute of Buddhist Studies, IBS, in Berkeley, Tokyo University, and the University of California at Berkeley, where he received his PhD. He received Jodo Shinshu ordination in 1978. He then served as the associate professor and assistant dean at IBS for 10 years and a resident priest for 3 years in a California Shin Buddhist temple. He is the author of the Buddhist classic, Ocean, and we are delighted to host his premiere of his new book, Jewels. Professor Tanaka.
Hello, nice to be here with you today. And I'm coming to you from Tokyo, Japan. today, for this lecture, we have people signing in from all over the world, or almost, from a number of locations. Brazil, Canada, mainland USA, Hawaii, and Japan. So it's actually really an exciting time. In a way, this is one of the outcomes of the pandemic, and one of the maybe the positive outcomes of the pandemic. And one other thing I wanted to share with you was that because that I'm home more often and not really going out, I took it upon myself to start a little garden. And here is a product, ta-da, a cucumber that has a cucumber garden that is bearing a lot of fruit, and I just wanted to share with you. It's an indication of how we can adapt to an undesirable change. Not everything is always bad, and it's upon us to turn things around and turn it into a benefit. And so today, because of the pandemic, I was not able to travel to Hawaii as I had hoped, but through this medium, we're able to carry on what we originally wanted to do. So I wish to, first of all, thank the sponsors of the Futaba Bloom lecture series, the Honolulu Betsuin Buddhist Temple, particularly to its president and the coordinator of this lecture, Mr. Dexter Marr. And so I also would like to express my heartfelt thanks and greetings to the Bloom family. I know Mrs. Dorothy Bloom has joined us. Hello, Dorothy, and also to Lily Bloom Domingo, the daughter of Dr. Bloom. So thank you for all that you have done to make this lecture series possible. And I want to send my personal greetings to you. I also wanted to thank the Honpa Honganji Mission of Hawaii for all the years of support that they've given me, especially in inviting me to many of the lectures they have held. And actually the first lecture or talk that I did outside of California was in Hawaii at 36 years ago, when the first YES camp was held. YES stands for Young Enthusiastic Shinshu Seekers, that Reverend Sandra Hiromatsu put together 36 years ago. And that was the start of many of my trips to Hawaii. And actually, being a poor student that I was, a graduate student, and that it allowed me to, and allowed myself and the family to afford trips to a vacation by hitching our vacation together with my speaking engagements. Also, Hawaii is a very important place for the Tanaka family because it was 120 years ago that my great-grandfather immigrated to Hawaii. That started our connection to the US, and we just had a grandson born in California, and he represents the sixth generation of the Tanakas in the US. And so Hawaii holds a dear place in our hearts for the Tanaka family. So I wish now to talk about Dr. Alfred Bloom, who set up the lecture, and he has meant a lot to me as someone who was my boss for 8 years at the Institute of Buddhist Studies. He was the dean. I was a young junior faculty member, and we worked together very well. And I consider him not only my boss, but more as a comrade, because we fought a lot of battles trying to actualize many of the ideals that were set up as our mission for the Institute of Buddhist Studies. One of the things we did was to set up in a relationship with a consortium of Christian and Jewish seminaries, and where we had students from our institute go to their school and their students coming to our school. It's one of the very few, maybe it's almost the only one in the world where you have that kind of a setup between a Buddhist institution and a Christian institution. Now, back to Dr. Bloom. One day when we were working in Berkeley, I got a call saying that he was in an accident, motor scooter accident. He was in the hospital. So I was obviously concerned. I heard that he was doing relatively okay. And so I knew it was not a life-threatening situation. But as I went to the hospital and approached his room, I could hear him mumbling something that didn't make sense. He was talking to himself. So I thought, gee, maybe he hit his head and went a little cuckoo. As I approached closer, I realized that he was not mumbling, but he was reciting a sutra, Jusege, from the larger Bhagavati Vyuha, Pure Land Sutra. And as I got closer and closer, I noticed that a line from the sutra, which actually is related to today's talk and what he means to what relates not only to the talk, but also to who he was as a scholar and as a minister. So I would like to share what he was reciting. And here is a line, and it goes like this. Ishu Kaihozo, which means I will open the storehouse of Dharma for all beings. So this line really stuck out. And so what happened was that a few years later, I believe, I think it was after this incident that we established, or we put together a festschrift, or a book in honor of Dr. Bloom. And here he is. Obviously, he was a little younger, engaged Pure Land Buddhism. And in the front of the book, I had him write Chinese characters. And this is what he wrote: Ho Zo, storehouse of Dharma. And that's his name, Alfred Bloom. And so we have an original calligraphy from Dr. Bloom, which whose meaning is storehouse of Dharma, and which is in the line that he was mumbling or chanting, Ishu Kaiho Zo, I will open the storehouse of Dharma for all beings. So today's theme is passing the torch to the next generation. And so this is really apropos and relevant to what I hope to talk about. So let me go back. And so allow me to say a few words now for about the reasons why I wrote this book, which is entitled Jewels, An Introduction to American Buddhism for Youth, Scouts, and the Young in Heart. I should say that even though it says American Buddhism, it will be relatively relevant to those of you who are from Canada. Actually, I hope in the future to write one specifically for the Canadian experience as well. So the first part of my talk, I'll talk about the book, and the second part, I shall talk more about the theme of passing the torch. So let me say a few words about why I wrote the book. Initially, I was invited by the Buddhist Scouting Committee of the Buddhist Church of America, or the Boy Scouts of America, because there is a Buddhist segment to it, and it's run primarily from the Buddhist Church of America, and the Scouting Committee asked me to write something. So this was 15 years ago, and it took a long, long time to finally complete it. So I'm very, very happy. Also, even though Buddhism seen enormous growth, there aren't very many good books for young people. And so I felt that it was important that we write something that I contribute to the need for such a book for youth and scouts, and I also include young at heart, which means that it's also good for adults as well. In fact, I have a feeling that many more adults will read it than youth. So I was a young Buddhist growing up in America, and I had my share of difficulties being a young Buddhist. And I felt that I felt a need to contribute to young Buddhists living in America, trying to live as a Buddhist, which often is not that easy. And and also, it's not just for Buddhists. I'm hoping for that any young person or anyone young at heart who are interested in Buddhism can access this book and find something to get started on. And so also, I wanted to write a book on Buddhist humor, but it turns out that I just didn't have enough to come up with a book fully or specifically on Buddhism and humor. But I was able to weave this in to the book, and that is why in the title, in parentheses, I have with a bit of humor. So there you have it, and these are the reasons for writing this book. Also, I forgot to mention the fact that I had, the publisher is the BDK America. And the reason for going with this publisher is that they are willing to make this book available free of charge. And that is something that I think is important for making such a book available. And it's available in its PDF form, and printed books will also be available free of charge to institutions when groups like church, temple, schools, when they order the book, they will be able to receive them free of charge, including shipping. Okay, so I want to now start sharing my book. By the way, I want to okay, so this is the title, Jewels, and I will explain a little bit later why. And I have already talked about the fact that it's primarily for youth and scouts, but also for adults as well, if you are looking for an introductory level. Now, here I have 3 endorsements, one from a Stanford student, one from the chairman of the National Buddhist Committee. He has the same name as mine, but he's not related. But here, I want to point out the fact that here we have an endorsement from Reverend Thich Tulok, who is a spiritual advisor for the Vietnamese Buddhist Youth Association. So this book also will try to reach out to other Buddhists, especially where there are young Buddhists, and the Vietnamese Americans tend to be Buddhists. And so that Reverend Tulok, who is a good friend of mine, has agreed to promote this amongst the Vietnamese American Buddhists. But again, I would like any people, any young people, whether they're Buddhists or not, to be able to read and look at this book. So I wanted to explain the cover. This is Los Angeles, a peace march led by Reverend Thich Nhat Hanh. And as you can see here, you have these young people. And I think it's a wonderful image of American Buddhism with all kinds of people representing the peoples of America on a peace march. A peace march which symbolizes engaged Buddhism. And Buddhism is not just for the individual well-being or the mental stability and peace of mind, but this symbolizes how Buddhism is for how to reach out to the greater society. Okay, so I will now go to the text of the book. And okay, this is the book, and it's dedicated to the well, earlier, I think it's okay. It's dedicated to the youth, Buddhist youth and young adults on whose shoulders the future of American Buddhism rests. And it's divided into 3 parts. Part 1, the legacy, the part 2, the teachings, and part 3 on daily life. And I think this is one of the a special characteristic of this book is that I want to deal with the daily and everyday issues of the young people, especially chapter 9, to which I will turn a little bit later. It deals with the issues and problems of daily life. Okay, and I have appendices here with important dates in Buddhism and Christianity, Buddhists in the world, various traditions in the US. And number 4 is how to relate to people of other religions. And then finally at the end, scouting, Buddhist scouting in America, where there are different merit badges and medals. Okay, so in the preface, here is this humorous cartoon. Jesus is coming. And then there is a Buddhist guy, a monk, who says, Buddha here now. This once appeared in the San Francisco Chronicle when we were having a conference of the Buddhist Christian Dialogue in 1998. And I think they knew, the San Francisco Chronicle newspaper knew that we're having a conference, and they put this up, and this became the topic of the conference. And this indicates the fact that Buddhism has arrived in America as one of the religions. Though still only 1% of the population, its impact is greater than that. And so I talk about how when I was growing up in the early 1960s, that as a Buddhist, I felt compelled. I felt, as I talked about a little earlier, that little uncomfortable being a Buddhist, because I think I write it here. Sorry. Okay. Oh, right around here. I talk about how, in America, for people in Japan and maybe in Brazil, you don't know that every morning we get up and we pledge allegiance to the flag. And there is a word called one nation under God. And when it came to God, I had difficulty saying, because I didn't believe in that kind of God. And so I tried keeping silent, or I keep silent, or quietly saying Buddha instead of God. Or I would say God, but interpreting in my mind Buddha. So the quandary that I experienced, the uncertainty, was certainly there as a youth. And that is another reason why I wanted to present this kind of book, so that the young Buddhists can feel confident. Even though I said Buddhism becoming more well-known, but still the Buddhist youth probably would face reasons for not feeling confident or comfortable. And one way to deal with this is knowledge and conviction. And hopefully this kind of book will help that in regard to that. Also, I wanted to express my appreciation and gratitude to the scouting, from which I benefit when I was young. And so when they asked me to write one, I really wanted to do that as a way of paying back to the scouting. Okay, so, and here I have people, once again to reinforce the fact that this book is for all Buddhists. And so we have people representing the various Buddhist traditions endorsing this book. Okay, and I wonder if Naho Umitani is here. Maybe Naho is one of the young people who edited this book, who looked at it, gave me some feedback. So I also acknowledge them up here. People like Leah Chase, Harrison Chin, Joshua McKinney, Kelly and Sarah Matsumura, Naho Umitani, and Jason Yokoyama. I felt it was important to get some feedback from them, because after all, I'm not young anymore, even though I think I'm young. But so it was good to get their response. So now, the topic, the title of the book, Jewels, comes from two places in Buddhism. First, which I had it in the back of my mind, is the three jewels, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. But in this book, I talk about outer jewel and inner jewel. Okay, outer jewel is what, as many of you know, if you have studied Buddhism, the Indra's nettle jewels, which a metaphor that is very popular, where you have a net extending in the sky, and you have jewels at each of the eye. And each eye is not able to shine on its own. Why can it shine on its own? How is it possible? It's because it receives the illumination from other jewels around them. So it's a interdependent, interconnected relationship in which one is supported by others. At the same time, I can also shine and illuminate others. So it's not only passively receiving, but also actively illuminating others. So the notion of interdependence, interconnectedness is certainly one of the key the hallmarks of Buddhism as it is understood in America and in the West. So that's the outer jewel, and the inner jewel is represented by this cartoon. Oh, by the way, the illustrations were done by a guy from Hawaii. His name is John Murakami. I've never met him, but he's been wonderful. I tell him, what I want, and he came back with the appropriate drawings. And sometimes we went back and forth several times, but this one, it took a little while to get it right. This is about how a friend, a soul, a jewel in the underlining of his friend's jacket. This is the inner jewel. So it's a symbol for how we, each of us, have a jewel within. We often call it Buddha nature, meaning that we all have the potential to become Buddhas or potential to be enlightened. And so this is a famous metaphor that comes from the Lotus Sutra, another well-known Mahayana sutra. So outer jewel, inner jewel, and that's where we get the jewel. So if this is new for you, please cherish these metaphors, because they're very helpful in trying to understand Buddhism, not conceptually, but visually and image-wise. And the fact that we are illuminated by various jewels, that the light from the illumination from other jewels, but at the same time, we can illuminate others. And then within us, we each have a jewel. Okay, so we are now part 1. So we have another around 20 minutes for me to go over the major parts. We certainly, so I want to highlight certain things here, and the first one is that this book is unique, I think, in that as a book for young people, I have 2 chapters specifically on Buddhism in America, and the first chapter is about how Buddhism has grown 17-fold in the 40 years or 50 years. And there are now, right now we're talking about right over here, about 3.2 million Buddhists in the US. And this is there is a fundamental change taking place in American religion. Actually, a number of Christians have decreased from 91% 50 years ago to 65% as of last year. And this means that a lot of people are becoming non-affiliated with churches. And so it's important for people involved in religion to know that especially young people are not as inclined to, eager to join institutions. So another point I start out by explaining how Buddhism is one of the 3 world religions. Most people know that, but a lot of people still don't know. Buddhism is, along with Christianity and Muslim or Islam, Buddhism is one of the 3 world religions. It's the smallest in terms of population, but it's the longest, it's the oldest by 500 years, older than Christianity and 1,100 years older than Islam. I mentioned this not to, mostly to give Buddhist youth confidence that their religion is not some, Asian cult where people simply stare at each other's belly buttons by meditating. I mean, that's the kind of image that I grew up when I was in the 1960s. That's the image that people had of Buddhism. But with knowledge, we learned that it is a world religion. And this is another example of how I wish to have a Buddhist youth have confidence in their religion. And I talk about Buddhism in America, different dimensions of Buddhism, features of Buddhism, various kinds. This is a gathering in Los Angeles at a inter-Buddhist gathering celebrating the birth of the Buddha. And here are the pioneer Buddhists from Asia, including Dalai Lama in the middle, which, by the way, I think his presence, his Dalai Lama has had an enormous impact in making Buddhism popular or known in America. Here are Jodo Shinshu kids at the Mormon temple in Utah. There are 3 young Americans who became ordained with the Shilai Temple in Los Angeles. Here is a gathering at Berkeley Zen Center at a Sunday service. Here's a young man attending a Buddhist service. And here's another young man doing, celebrating the birth of the Buddha. And now many people know that there, unlike in the past, we have famous people who are Buddhists, including Richard Gere here in the middle. And I don't have a picture, but Tiger Woods is a Buddhist, and a number of other people. And there are people who are almost Buddhist, like Phil Jackson, the basketball coach, and of course, the late Steve Jobs, whom we call nightstand Buddhist. Here is at the Zen Center in Berkeley, ladies preparing the shrine. Typical meditation session belonging to the Rinzai school. Okay, so this is one aspect of Buddhism that has been emphasized in America, that is engaged Buddhism. That Buddhism engages in concerns and matters of the world. Here, Buddhist priests walking on Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, protesting the treatment of Buddhists in Burma. And if you can see it here, it says no Olympics, no human rights, no Olympics. So this is a little before 2008 Beijing Olympics. They were protesting the fact that without human rights, you shouldn't have Olympics. So these are some examples of how Buddhists are speaking out on matters of the world. And one other point I want to point out here, there are 4 women priests. So that's another hallmark, especially of the convert Buddhists in America, how there are many women priests in the leadership, which is unlike the situation in Asia. Okay, so another Buddhist humor that some of you know, this is classic American Buddhist humor. Why couldn't the Buddha vacuum under his sofa? Because he had no attachments. And I like the illustration here. Okay, so this is the Shilai Temple in Los Angeles, probably the largest temple in North America. And Spirit Rock in Inside Meditation West. This doesn't look like a temple in Asia, although it's modeled after Southeast Asian architecture, but it's set in the hills of California hills. So it's markedly or notably an American Buddhist scene. And here's Dalai Lama at Central Park speaking in front of 5,000, 10,000 people. And this is the indication of his influence in American Buddhism. Okay, so let me just go quickly to life. I have chapter 2, chapter 4, Life of the Buddha. It's nothing unique, but because of the help of John Murakami, I like some of these sceneries where this is that famous incident in his youth. As a very sensitive man, boy, he sat in the garden of his palace, and as he was watching the farmers till the land, the worm popped up. Then all of a sudden a bird came and grabbed the worm. And then a large bird came and grabbed a little bird. And so here you have a Buddha kind of crying because, or feeling sad that why do creatures have to kill one another? So this is an indication that he was a sensitive child, and which then eventually led him to become, eventually led him to leave the castle in search of truth, to find answers to the suffering of the world. And so I'm gonna skip this, and I have these illustrations, some paintings. Here's when he was, before he became enlightened, but in his ascetic life when he was in training, but unable to find a breakthrough, an answer to his quest. So I'm gonna skip. Chapter 2 has to do with the history of Buddhism throughout Asia. And then the following chapter, brief history of Buddhism in America. And I think that it's important for people to know when Buddhism began in America. It began quite early, as early as 1844. And Buddhism that came not from Asia, but through Europe. So it's more the intellectual Buddhism. And then later, the Chinese immigrants brought Buddhism to the West Coast and started a temple in 1852, 53, yeah. And then actually there were about 400 temples or buildings which were like temples on the West Coast, 400 of them in the late 19th century. People don't know that. And then later the Japanese came, and which strengthened Buddhism, and through the war, and so we have all this so important events in American Buddhist history. Here's a reference to, in 1942, Reverend Issei Matsuru, a Jodo Shinshu priest, is arrested and later placed in an internment camp along with 110,000 Japanese Americans, of whom 60% were Buddhist. So this is an important part of history of Buddhism. Recently, has been a book written by Duncan Williams called American Sutra. And if you haven't seen it, please do look at it. It's an important book about Buddhism in America. And here is Dalai Lama receiving the gold medal in 2007 in front of the president, Speaker of the House, and the head of the Senate. So this is symbolic of how Buddhism has arrived in America when you have a Buddhist priest receiving a medal. Of course, you know, he's not just a Buddhist priest, but he's titular head of the Tibetan people. Okay, so bear with me about 10 more minutes or a little less than that. Second part, this is a part 2. This is where we have the teachings. And I wanted to make reference to point out that I first talk about the Four Noble Truths, of course, but the example that I use is Aesop's fable of greedy dog. Many of you know Aesop's fable. And rather than using a story from the East or from Asia, I thought that it would be better to use a story that American young people should know, Aesop tales, and the story of the greedy dog. And I use this story as a way of talking about the Four Noble Truths. So this happened throughout the history of Buddhism or any world religions, because wherever Buddhism went, it took the stories from that area and made it more meaningful. And this is one of the lessons that I think that can be gleaned from not only this book, but others, that in order to make sense to people who are reading it, we have to use the materials and stories and thinking of that indigenous people, the native in a sense of people who are already in that land. And so, I think the rest is quite straightforward, and this one is one that symbolizes how we talk about Buddhism, and another humor. And all of you, some of you, I'm sure, know this humor. It's the hot dog humor. The monk, the first part goes like this: the monk goes to a hot dog vendor, and the vendor says, "What would you like, sir?" And the monk says to the vendor, "Make me one with everything." Now, I don't have time to explain, but it should be funny. Everything meaning, I guess I will explain that, everything on it with, radish and mustard and sauerkraut and all that. But he's also saying, make me one with everything, meaning in tune with everything, the spiritual experience. Okay, the second part is here. So he gives him $20 and he doesn't get his change from the vendor, so he's getting a little antsy and says, "Where is my change?" And the vendor says this, "Sir, the change must come from within you." Ta-da! Of course, this change is not the money change, but the internal transformation, right? Inside, which is all about. And I want to point out one thing here. In the world today, especially in advanced countries, we are seeing a change in the paradigm or the makeup of religion. And I call it, and some people call it spirituality, but I say we are making a shift from a religion of belief to religion of awakening. And so for those who feel, who agree with that kind of a new kind of religion, a religion awakening, Buddhism makes sense to a lot of people. And that's one of the reasons why Buddhism is growing, not huge, but little by little, it's making inroads into Western culture, not only America, but Australia, New Zealand, and in Europe, as well as North Canada. Okay, so I think what I'm want to do, if I can do this, is I want to share, since we have people from Japan as well, I want to give them a flavor of Hawaii. because right now you're not getting much anything Hawaiian. And if I can share this video that Dexter Marr and his people made, it's about how the Buddhists, the Jodo Shinshu Buddhists in Hawaii are responding to the coronavirus and the pandemic by expressing gratitude to the caregivers, the doctors and the nurses and the medical people.
The ringing of the temple bell in Buddhism is a deep and sacred ritual steeped in ancient tradition. The temple bell you hear represents the gratitude and deep appreciation of the members and friends of the Hompa Honganji mission of Hawaii throughout the state of Hawaii. To all healthcare workers, first responders, police officers, firefighters, and to all the businesses who are tirelessly working so that we may continue to safely live during this corona pandemic, and often at the expense of their own safety and well-being. We ring the bell to honor our government workers, the governor, and the mayors of our counties as well. Namu Amida Butsu.
Aloha from Lihue Honganji. On behalf of all of us, I want to thank healthcare workers, firefighters, police, EMTs, and all those who help to maintain the cleanliness and the safety of our hospitals and clinics. We're filled with gratitude for their many sacrifices during this pandemic. As the Buddhist concept of interdependence says, we are all in this together, and we will all get through this together. Please stay safe and thank your local healthcare workers and first responders and keep them in your thoughts. Thank you. Mahalo.
So mahalo, for those of you who don't know, mahalo means thank you. And I think Dexter was also involved in it. It's I liked it because when Dexter showed that to me, I felt that it expresses the kind of the Buddhist spirit, Hawaii spirit. Not since we are Honolulu Betsuin is sponsoring this, I thought it was good to see a bit of the sponsor of this program. Okay, so why don't we, it's been an hour and I question and answer and discussion for a while.
Question says, in the meanwhile, say, how is Shin Buddhism distinctly different from other sects or schools of Buddhism? What makes it unique?
All right. Okay, the question was, what makes Shin Buddhism unique compared to other schools of Buddhism? And one is that the founder of Shin Buddhism was Shinran, and 800 years ago, he was once a monk, but he married and had a family. And so that makes him unique, especially in Japan and also within all of Buddhism. So ever since the priests of Shin Buddhism have been married, and that makes it quite different. It's often compared to Martin Luther, the founder of Protestant Christianity. And the second one is doctrinal. Often it is said, Jodo Shinshu people too pride themselves in saying that we are other-powered with a religion of other power and not self-power. In other words, the salvation comes from the rooted in Amida Buddha and not in ourselves. But however, I think in my view, that especially Mahayana Buddhism has a strong element of other power, that ultimately salvation or enlightenment, awakening comes from beyond the self. In other words, other power. And so it is not true that Jodo Shinshu is only Jodo Shinshu is other power and others are not. What I'm saying is that other schools of Buddhism are other powered. It's just that I would say that Shin Buddhism goes to the extreme of emphasizing other power. We call it radical other power, extreme other power. So, and we don't have a particular practice. We don't emphasize meditation, but we do emphasize effort. It doesn't mean we do nothing, that the Shin Buddhists also listen, study, and aspire to understand the teachings. So on the other hand, we can engage in all kinds of practices as long as we don't say, I am the cause of awakening. that I am making this, I'm doing this, that becomes egotistical, and which is true for any religion, Buddhism, otherwise. So that's my answer to the question, what makes Shin Buddhism unique?
Okay, he has also a follow-up question about, let's see, what makes Shinran Shonen a unique leader?
Oh, okay. What makes Shinran a unique leader? Well, I in a way, it's basically unique in a sense. I think it comes down to the fact that he got married, even though he was no longer a regular monk. He continued to live a life of a monk in a sense of wanting to share the teaching, today's theme of passing the torch. And so he specifically began to promote his understanding amongst the ordinary people. And that is why he formed a following, and which then became the largest denomination in terms of number in Japanese Buddhism. So I'll stop at that. Okay. Any other?
Ken, Rod
Yeah.
Maruyama asks, he says, I like the approach of focusing on the youth to convey Buddhism. One of the challenges we have is reaching the next generation. How should we answer the under God phrase of the Pledge of Allegiance when children ask us?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think under God, in Buddhism, we don't have a God that created, a creator God, or God that punishes, but especially the creator God. But if God in a Judeo-Christian tradition represents love, we have love in Buddhism. We call it compassion of the Buddha. So in all Mahayana Buddhism and also in Theravada Buddhism, Southern Buddhism, there is an emphasis on compassion, that enlightened people, awakened people exude and promote and have a deep sense of compassion. So we can say that, for example, in the Jodo Shinshu tradition, we have Amida. And Amida is like God, but it's not God as in a creator God, but Amida represents the compassionate force in our lives. So if God means compassion, then we have Amida Buddha or other Buddhas, Dharmakaya, the Vairochana Buddha, all these different kinds of Buddhas that represents compassion. So we can say, when someone asks, do you believe in God? And I would say, yes, we believe in God of compassion and love. And we call that Buddha in different forms. But not a God that created the universe, creator God. So I think we can, so we should, I wouldn't, I wouldn't recommend saying we don't believe in God. If you want to be tactful and have people understand you, say we believe in God, but our God, Buddha, is a symbol, represents love and compassion. I hope that, is it that people cannot speak, Dexter?
I am trying to unmute them now. So
Yeah.
I think I have Daniel Heslop on voice. So Daniel,
Okay, Daniel, can you speak?
Can you hear me?
you're soft.
I'm soft. I'll get closer to my mic.
Can you?
I'm a musician, so I have flexible mics here. Is
Oh,
that better? Hello.
yeah, okay.
Louder.
Okay, now I can hear you better.
Okay. So my question was that given the emphasis on general Buddhism
Yeah.
can you talk about mixed practice? And what I mean by that is Nembutsu and meditation. Shandao, for example, seemed to be opposed to this. But it seems like today, as you mentioned, religion is becoming more about awakening rather than faith. Do you feel that meditation and Nembutsu are compatible?
Yeah, well, yeah, Nembutsu is a form of meditation. So, we have Shila, the precepts, meditation, and wisdom. These are the three trainings. And so, so the meditation part is often the sitting meditation, but recitative Nembutsu. By Nembutsu, if you mean recitation, recitative Nembutsu, if it's done in a proper mindset for simply expressing gratitude for the fact that I am embraced in the compassion of Amida, then it is a form of meditation, and it leads to the calming of the mind. And so I think that Nembutsu is a meditative practice. In fact, in the olden days, in China and earlier period, recitation, the recitation was considered a form of meditation. Yes. Okay. I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah, and as you know that when I visited Canada and Northwest, the U.S. recently, I have been emphasizing the importance of, for Jodo Shin Buddhists, a kind of a meditative form of contemplating on the various forces and people who make up our lives. I call it the Nembutsu contemplation or Nembutsu meditation. And so we think about, Nen means to think on. We contemplate on these various people and events that make up our lives. And ultimately it's Amida Buddha, but we have to contemplate in a quiet way because we're too concerned about the worldly things, but we have to take time to contemplate and to direct our mind toward that. And so by doing so, we are engaged in what we normally call it meditation. The biggest importance is not to think that by meditating, that causes the enlightenment. That's the self-powered attitude. But I will say no Buddhist, either if it's Theravada or other Mahayana schools, will consider think in those terms, that when people awaken to a truth or have some insight, it's often very an attitude of humility that, I am not the one causing this, but I'm embraced by a greater force, including the parents and friends and society that make my lives possible. Okay, anyone else?
So next we have Miriam, who would like to ask a question.
Yeah, hi. Earlier at the sort of introductory stage of your talk, you mentioned that there was a development in American Buddhism where Buddhist, I didn't recall which Buddhist organizations started interacting with interfaith Jewish and Christian organizations, and you said that objections were raised, but you didn't specify what objections were raised and by whom. And I was just curious about who had a bone to pick with anybody about that.
I see. Okay, we're talking about the Institute of Buddhist Studies. the graduate school affiliated with the Jodo Shinshu tradition in Berkeley, California. And I worked there for 10 years. I'm also a graduate of that program. And so when I began to work, I became an assistant professor and also assistant dean. And at that time, we were trying to set up a situation where we have exchanges of students and classes and units and all that. Okay, so the objection came from our own organization, I would call it those who are conservative, thinking that we need not necessarily affiliate ourselves in that way with the other religions. But and also, to be honest, it was also political too, in that certain faction didn't agree with the bishop at the time, or the direction of the Institute of Buddhist Studies. So that happens in any organization. You have the progressives and the conservatives, and the objection came from the conservatives.
And I had a follow-up that's not exactly related, but it just came out of your discussion about how to talk about God.
Yes.
I was drawn to Buddhism because I came from a secular Jewish background. And I have no problem telling people that I don't believe in God, but I don't care what you think. You're entitled to think whatever you like. Yeah. And actually, the person who helped me figure out how to speak about it without, breaking down a lot of fences was Reverend Koyo Kobose. He said something about you don't have to use the word atheist, but you can say non-theistic, which means that whether there's a God or not is not really the subject matter of the Buddha Dharma. And that it's what people experience and how they experience things that makes them determine for themselves very personally what they think about God. And I know that it sounds complicated, but I find that it's much better than like telling people that the Buddha is a God, because not everybody sees the Buddha that way. And I would rather not, convey something that could become a misconception. Yeah. I would just rather very plainly say, there may be gods, we don't know. In the Buddha's time, he actually did converse with gods. But this is personal, and Buddhism, to my way of understanding it, is non-theistic. Yeah. No, I think that's fine. I think that's the way to talk about it. But I was trying, my particular response had to deal with, if you want to, for those who believe in God, if you want to maintain some kind of a connection, and especially for Buddhist youth who's living in a Judeo-Christian culture, to simply say there is no God, it would be, and if they don't have an ability to respond and have a knowledge to respond, then it would be better to have some bridge there. And obviously, as you develop yourself in terms of understanding, then you can come up with your strong opinion. So, but one thing is important to note, that there is maybe not so much in Theravada Buddhism, but in Mahayana Buddhism, that there is an affirmation of the existence of a loving force, or a compassionate force, or a force or spiritual working that embraces us, and that is a fact in Mahayana Buddhism. But again, it's not a creator God. Yeah. Yeah, and I think, depending on the kid audience that you're talking about, but I think anybody over the age of 10 can handle the conversation. I had to deal with it when I was 7. So I think it's altogether possible that it's not necessary to tweak it in such a way as we step into it gradually and say, well, yeah, Buddha's kind of a God. because that just sort of creates this whole other tension that comes up where people say, oh, well, then you're a pagan and you're going to hell, because you get that right back if you say that, if you say, I believe that Buddha has this God feeling to him. That's when kids get, slammed by their peers for saying, oh, you're going to hell. And that happens a lot.
Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, I think I also affirm what you're saying, and I think there are different ways of dealing with it. And I have a section, chapter 10, where I have question and answers on some of these questions. And so maybe you can take a look at it and let me know.
I'd love to, because I'm dealing with children now, and I still get this sort of conversation from this, and my peers are giving me a hard time.
Yeah.
And, just trying to give this, I think this will be a great, valuable tool for them.
Yeah. So this is a great example of for those of you from Japan, this is something that you don't have to face in Japan, but here in the U.S. that situation is different. So I hope this is an interesting moment for you to realize that there are different needs that we have in other parts of the world with regard to how to talk about Buddha. Good, Miriam. Good point. Thanks. Okay.
Ken,
My question.
before we go to break, I want to get into a question that Penny Atchison has. And she says, thank you for writing and sharing your book. Sorry, I haven't read it yet, but I wonder if you have suggestions for older folks to assist younger folks to explore and perhaps embrace Buddhist values besides reading the book.
Yeah. Well, actually, that's the object of my second part. But I think modeling, you become the model for what Buddhism is. And kids look at, in Japan, they have a phrase that they look at your back. In other words, not what you say only, but how you act. And that's how they learn. So that's the one approach. But basically, do whatever you can to empower them. I think there are young people at the churches or temples, and they want to do things, but sometimes the adults don't allow them to explore and do things that they're interested in. So empowering them to do things to learn the teachings and to share the teachings. So I think also talking about their feelings and thoughts about the religion at home, at dinner and during the meals. How often do people really talk about religious matter? It doesn't have to be religious matter, but life in general on a deeper level. Not just talking about, whether the San Francisco Giants won the baseball game or whatever, talking about sports and politics. But we can also talk about religion or Buddhism in a personal way. And I think that will go a long ways. And also, when I said the kids are watching you, is that, when you do a certain simple things, like when you before meal, you put your hands together and express gratitude for the food that you're partaking. I mean, so basically, if you are living it sincerely and honestly, and sometimes sometimes we don't live up to the expectation, but that's okay. You do what you can to live in sincerely and honestly. And then, and other than that, having conversations and taking people, your kids to temples and other activities, and showing them books and sharing books together. Those are the best ways, but it's not often easy talking to your own kids about religion, and that's why how you act probably has a more profound impact than what you tell them or what you tell them to do. So that's my response.
Okay, and the final question for this segment goes to Linda Nagai.
Yes, thank you. I was laughing at your little comics and it kind of left me. But you mentioned the data regarding the Christians, that the younger ones or people are going away from traditional or organizational religion. Yeah. So that's probably happening in our Buddhism, Jodo Shinshu also. So yeah. How do we reach out to them without having them coming to temple or, all of these things that they probably don't want to do? There's got to be a way. Do you have any ideas how we can do that?
Well, but basically we have to accept the fact that the world is changing. People are probably, let's just say people still, especially in North America, young people too, think about religion and consider religion important. But they don't have the time or the wherewithal to attend churches and institutions. So 40%, almost 40% of ages 40 and younger are no longer affiliated. That's an astonishing change from 50 years ago when only 1% were unaffiliated. So I think we just have to accept that for now things are changing in that way. That doesn't mean that the people are, even the young people, are not interested in religion. Many of them say, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual but not religious. We call it NRBS, not religious but spiritual, or we call them nons. So I think what we can do are, if you're talking about the activities, that empowering them to have their own activities. In California, I know there are like techno-Buddhas and younger groups getting together. But another activity that I think of is actually, traveling together. Many of the successful tours take kids from the US to Japan to visit the Buddhist countries, Buddhist temples and facilities. And they travel together and they meet each other and they galvanize and they become lifelong friends. And so I think doing things together, it could be like campouts and things like that. If you're talking about activities, for many years I did these youth programs, at IBS, where we have young people come together, and many of them didn't want to come because they were forced to come. But after 2 weeks, they were crying and they didn't want to leave each other because it was such a great time. So I think that in terms of activities, not just to come for a large conference for one day, but actually spend time together. In fact, one of the reasons why I decided to go into Buddhism was that I spent a whole month at the Institute of Buddhist Studies at the summer session in 1969. There were 12 young people from all over the US, and of the 12, I think 10 became ministers.
Wow.
And many of them served, and I'm one of them. And even though I have left BCA, but I'm still, doing what I can. But it's because of the camaraderie that we develop, the bond that we develop, and especially amongst young people. That is a motivating force to be connected. Religion by itself is not a great motivator for a whole lot of people. In any given time, I always say that only 10% of the population are seriously interested in religion or pursuing religion. But other people get involved in religion for other factors, like social and culture, for food, and all these other reasons. So we have to think of different ways of making the pure teachings interesting through other means, like going on trips together and spending time together.
Thank you.
Okay, so it's a little bit past 2:30, so let's go to break.
The topic of this seminar, this lecture, was passing the torch to the next generation. And originally I had lessons to be learned from the book, but I have changed it, and maybe Dexter, we want to make sure that I'm going to change it to lessons I learned from writing the book, because I felt it was too presumptuous to say that lessons we can learn from the book, but I learned something in writing the book about passing the torch. And so I wanted to emphasize that as we pass the torch, either with our younger generation or with the larger society, I said to the next generation, but actually we're talking about passing it to our kids and grandkids, but also to our fellow members of a larger community, who then will be able to pass it on down to the next generation. So it's spatially this way, and then time-wise. So please keep note of that. So the lesson that I learned, I have written about that on page, let's see. But okay, you don't, that's what happens, I can't find it now, but the three things, what we need as we pass the torch is within us, as one, sense of confidence, confidence in the religion. Otherwise, how can you share it to others? We often say proud, we should be proud of our religion. We are proud of our religion, but there has to be some substance to it. So we ourselves need to be confident by having conviction and knowledge. And the same goes with the next generation. Secondly is joyful. Sometimes Buddhism is seen as somewhat pessimistic because we often talk about suffering, dukkha. But remember, dukkha is just the start. That's the kicker. That's the initiator. And as we go through the teachings and learn the teachings and apply it to our lives, then we become joyful. We become happy. Of course, we're not always joyful all the time, but fundamentally joyful. And our Sangha should be joyful and having fun. And I think Bon Dance is kind of exemplifies that. People are having fun. But that not just at the summertime, but throughout the year. So when people look at Buddhist temple and say, or Buddhist Sangha and say, hey, they look like they're having fun, they're joyful, So if we're joyful, then that will be contagious. Others will see that and say, oh, I want some of that too. But that has to come from within, which means you have to know the teachings and be able to willing to share. So that's the second one. And the last one is a word called relevant, R-E-L-E-V-A-N-T. We used to say that a lot in the 1960s. Actually, when I was a young Buddhist in the Buddhist Church of America, I was a national YBA president, and Reverend Kobata, who is a good friend of mine who's a minister at San Francisco, we were the young radicals. We had our long hair, we wore our army jackets, and we went to the Buddhist Church of America board meeting representing the young people. And they say, well, what do you want to do? And we said, well, we have this program that we want to hire like about 6 young people in a different districts, and they'd be paid, and they can kind of facilitate activities for the young people. And we call it Relevant American Buddhists. We call it RAB, R-A-B. So we had the word relevant, and that was and it had some impact. We hire people, young people, not for a lot of money, but we were filled with idealism. One of the reasons why I went into Buddhism is, well, there are two reasons. One is my existential quest to overcome fear of death and impermanence. I was afraid to die, like many people, and what this life is about. And Buddhism seemed to provide an answer for that. So that's the existential part. But the other part had to do with more social. As a product of the 1960s, I wanted to use my religion to change the world. We used to say, change the world. And we were very idealistic. And that was one of my motivations. So relevant, going back to the word relevant. So I feel that in whatever we do, in the book, I try to make it relevant to the younger people by citing stories that they know already, not always stories from Asia. That's being relevant. And chapter 10, which I didn't have a chance to go over very carefully, or chapter 9, has 10 different issues and problems of the young people, including, losing a loved one. I just lost my mother of almost 98 years old in San Francisco. And I wasn't able to go back because of the pandemic. So I was not able to attend the funeral. But so, in a way, I'm still kind of going through the mourning period. But because of Buddhism and the fact that she lived till 98, that, it's nothing to really feel down about. We should celebrate. In fact, we had a Zoom funeral memorial service of sort. We call it a celebration with our relatives all over the world. And we celebrated. But behind that, I understand because of Buddhism that we all have to go sometime. We all know that in the head, but Buddhism helps you to appreciate that. And all the more, we try to live every day fully because of that. The originally impermanence for monks and nuns, you know what the message was? Because everything is changing, don't get attached, right? Don't get attached. And you do meditation, you do precepts to train your mind to become not attached. But for householders like us, that's impossible. Our life itself is full of attachment. Marriage is attachment. It's an epitome of attachment. So, so what we do, you turn that around, and because of its change, everything is changing. Of course, not to be too attached to the past, not attached to the future, but to relish, to appreciate the now, every moment as much as possible. Of course, for many of us who are Jodo Shinshu, we are all ordinary foolish beings. So we cannot live it fully, but that's okay. That is okay. Knowing that's a given. That's like the Constitution. It's a given. So when you cannot live up to the ideals, it's all right, and then go back and try to aspire that. But ultimately, in all Mahayana Buddhism especially, and Buddhism in general, that we are embraced in the compassion. So everything in the end will be fine. So that perspective is important. Okay, so those three things as we pass the torch: confidence, being joyful, and being relevant. And so if you have the outline, we're on page, this one doesn't have an outline. Okay, well, just to, again, to go over a little bit of, as we pass the torch of Buddhism, actually we're in a very good situation, very good time. If we're gonna pass the torch in North America, it's a good time now because Buddhism has a positive evaluation by people in America. There was a research, a survey done in 2003, and it asked, what do you think of Buddhism? And is Buddhism is a tolerant religion? And 56% of the people said yes. Well, you may say, well, 44% didn't say it, but still 56% is a pretty good high number. And peace-loving, 63%. And that is a positive. And then finally, do you welcome the presence of Buddhism in the USA? And 60% or 56% said yes. So that as a religion, it is something that is thought relatively highly. And so, it's not like 50 years ago when, as I said, even I had the image myself that Buddhism is an Asian cult, where people meditate by staring at each other's navel. I don't know where I got that, but I got it because I'm a product of society, and it's idolatrous and all that. But now we have Tiger Woods is a Buddhist, Richard Gere is a Buddhist. I think that Steve Jobs. Have you listened to his speech at Stanford in 2005? If you haven't, you should go to internet and just look up Steve Jobs' graduation speech. And you have a 15-minute speech in which he lays down 3 things, and one of which is on death. And you can clearly tell that comes from his Buddhist background, because he meditated for a long time, especially in his 20s, and he has a positive attitude towards death. And just think about it. He's given a graduation speech to a bunch of 22-year-olds. And one of the things he talks about is death. You would, ordinary Americans wouldn't do that. But he did it because of, I think, of his Buddhist background. And so that's something to know. So that you can see how Buddhism has kind of seeped into American culture in different ways, especially with regard to death. And there are other aspects of death, and simply put, death seen, I think the best way to talk about it is, the famous story called Freddie the Leaf? Freddie the Leaf, written by Leo Bascaglia, that, when I first read it, I said, gee, this cannot be written by a professor from Southern California who's a Catholic. And it turns out that mid-age, he became interested in Buddhism. He even spent some time in Kyoto. So he studied Buddhism and especially noted the understanding of death, which is reflected in that story, that one, death is natural. It is not a punishment. It's not a failure. It's natural. Just as the spring comes after winter, it's natural. And so that is why that book sold 5 million copies in the US. And even in Japan, it was translated. It sold millions. And so it had an impact on the way we looked at death. And I think that there's been a PBS, Public Broadcasting Corporation, TV series on death based on Buddhism. So I think that that is one of the things that we can be, that Buddhism is making a contribution that is positive for North American societies. Okay, so again, I talked about the welcome part of the. Again, I wanted to stress, earlier I talked about the non-affiliated people, the nones, or the NRBS, not religious but spiritual. There are many people who say, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. And I have a feeling that these people are some of these people are kind of taking interest in Buddhism, because Buddhism is seen more as a spiritual tradition, not as a religion. And that is one way of pitching Buddhism. We certainly don't, feel like everyone has to become Buddhist. Dalai Lama is popular for many things, but when he speaks to a lot of people, at the end he says, "You don't have to become a Buddhist." Don't be a Buddhist. In fact, he says, So he's not an evangelist saying, if you don't become a Buddhist, you'll go somewhere. I mean, that it's not that kind of attitude. And so, that is something that I want to talk about here. But before that, I just want to say a few words about, Buddhism in a 2,600-year-old history has not gone over the wall, the Western Wall, I call it. The wall that's separating the East and the West. Of course, in the 17th, 18th century, Buddhism started to be known by the scholars, but it never became a religion of the masses, of the ordinary people. But from 150 years ago, in America especially, Buddhism has begun to take roots as a religion of ordinary people. And of course, the Asian immigrants brought Buddhism to America. But especially since 1960, 65 on especially, that many people who didn't grow up Buddhist are converting to Buddhism or are taking strong interest in Buddhism. And with that, we can say that this is the first in the history of Buddhism, that Buddhism became rooted amongst the ordinary people in the West. And then another interesting point is that it was not transported or imported by kings and the emperors as it did in Asia. If you know the history of Buddhism in Asia, the Buddhism was really transported mostly by the ruling elite, not by ordinary people. They wanted Buddhism because of not only the religion, but also the arts and the architecture, the technology, and the medicine, all these other reasons. And so it had other benefits. But now in North America and Europe and others, Buddhism is invited, taken in for its original intent, which is awakening, understanding, compassion. So there are no other frills in the pure Buddhism is what people are looking for. Of course, nowadays, mindfulness meditation has become very popular, and it has become used for, relieving tension and for non-religious purposes. But still, I think it's still positive. It's leading to the alleviation of suffering in some respect. But it is there is a shortcoming that it is being used for secular purpose. So, but at the same time, my position is that as someone interested in Buddhism at its face value, we don't need to reject it. That we can take it in and promote it, and then hopefully to lead others to the real intent of meditation, which is realization and awakening. Okay, so I want to talk about passing the torch in terms of 5 ways: why, what, who, whom, and how. Okay. So why do we want to pass the torch? And it's not because we have to save the poor souls who are not Buddhists. That's not our attitude. Our attitude is Pali is ehipassiko. Ehipassiko means please come here and see. So earlier I talked about how if we're joyful, we're having fun and being happy, then we can say, oh, are you interested? You come here and check it out. Ehi passiko, you know. So, by the way, passiko is cognate of perceive because it's an Indo-European language. So ehi passiko, come here, ehi, come here and see. And that is a kind of a, you know, more of a wholesome attitude than saying, or, you know, if you don't see, you know, you must take Buddhism. So I think it's, you know, I think that's the strength. Some people say, you know, we don't, therefore we don't really are active enough, but I think that attitude will draw people who can appreciate that. And then secondly, benefiting others as part of self-benefit and benefit for others. Japanese called jiri rita. Sanskrit is called sva arta, para arta. Sva means self, para means others, arta means benefit. And that's the basic, we have found something that is worthy in us, and we want to share with others because we care about others. That's another aspect. Interdependence means that we are connected, we care about others, you know, but we don't want to force it upon them. If they have their own religion, that's fine, you know. Many years ago, I was in a Buddhist Christian dialogue conference and in a small group discussion, and I was, the topic was, can they be saved in the other tradition? So I asked my Christian friend, counterpart, can I be saved? And she said, I'm sorry, no. I knew that in the head because if you don't accept Jesus, you cannot be saved. But she was almost a friend, but doctrinally, she said, you cannot be saved. Then the session ran out of time. But if I were asked the same question, if she were to ask me, can I be saved? I would say, why not? You know, I hope you can. And I believe that if you walk your path, the Christian path, you will be saved. And that is the difference. And I think that we should be proud of that. And I include Dr. Bloom in this effort. Whenever I think about passing the torch, I think of Al. Because, you know, he was a professor at the University of Hawaii, but he left it early to come to the Institute of Buddhist Studies to become the dean because he wanted to share his personal teachings, you know, that he felt so strongly about. You know, he was a fundamental Christian. When he was young, he was in the military, came to Japan as a member of the U.S. Army. He was given a talk on Christianity, and he was talking about God, and the Japanese translator translated like Amida Buddha. And then Dr. Bloom, he turned around. He wasn't a doctor then. He was a young 19-year-old. He turned around and said, what? There is something like God? Because he was taught that there's only God. Nothing is like it. And he heard about, it's like Amida, and it shocked him. And that's why when he went back to America, took interest in Buddhism, and eventually got his PhD at Harvard and became a professor of religion, but also became a Shin Buddhist. He got ordained. And then to the end of his life, you know, and till this day, you can find it in the announcement that Dexter passed out, that there is a link to his homepage or web page that you can check out. He has all kinds of important lessons, and he has lessons on Shin Buddhism that you can partake. And so he was till the end exemplifying passing the torch to the very end, and Shinran too, and Buddha too. So again, you know, we cannot all be like the Buddha and Shinran or even Dr. Bloom, but we can do whatever we can in our capacity. So that's the why. The what. The what is what are we passing on? Obviously, it's the Buddhism. It's the teachings and the practices. And again, I already talked about how Buddhism is seen in a positive light. But actually, Buddhism is not so exotic in America or North America. Recently, I wanted to show you a book that I love. It's called here, Buddhist Modernism. Buddhist Modernism. It's by David McMahon. I can send this out later to other people, but here, this book called Buddhist Modernism is how Buddhism developed in America. And what he says, one of the many things he says is that Buddhism is not so exotic. There are exotic parts about Buddhism that Americans could not easily accept, like reincarnation and, nirvana becoming like extinction, which is not extinction was a bad translation. Nirvana is much more full, much more lively, but here what he says is that actually in American culture there already existed values that are similar to Buddhism, which allowed for Buddhism to be accepted a little bit more easily, and that is founded in the Romanticism, Transcendentalists, and Rationalists, and these are the fundamental thoughts of America, or Western civilization, almost the modern Western civilization. But I wanted to speak of it in terms of my own experience, which makes it a little bit easier. When I was in high school, somehow I wasn't an avid reader, but I was drawn to Henry Thoreau, the transcendentalist, Henry Thoreau. And he has a famous essay called The Walden Pond. And in it, he leaves the city, goes out into the woods, lives in this cabin with hardly any furniture. And he enjoys the solitude of being in nature. And somehow it just drew me, and no one ever told me to read that book. And I think it's partly because by then I was already somewhat of a Buddhist, but then later I learned that transcendentalists in the around 1840s, they took interest in Hinduism and Buddhism. In fact, when Henry Thoreau died, his friends commented that his face looked so peaceful, like the Buddha. And so transcendentalists emphasize, and romantic people who advocated romanticism, romantics, yeah. And there are different varieties, of course, but in general, they talked actually about interdependence, ideas of interdependence, like organic wholeness of nature and our inseparability. We're not inseparable from it. And feeling of awe and reverence for nature. And nature seen as not just part of God's creation, but part of God. Not just part of God's creation, but God itself. And connection to nature through cultivation of solitude, especially in Thoreau. So you have already precedents. And there's a notion also of, among the romantics, of what is called subjective turn or inward turn. There's a tradition of turning inward. Truth is within, not outside. The power of the individual mind to observe one's emotions and inclinations. These are part of the romantic tradition. And that is why I think meditation is very important, attractive to Americans, that there is a fundamental subliminal kind of tradition that's already there. But Christianity and Islam, though it had that kind of meditative tradition, it's no longer very strong. And that's why Buddhism has provided that for many Americans in an easy way, in a way that anyone can practice. So these notions of interdependence, nature, wholeness, subjective turn, and even this one last point, rationalism, which is more opposed to romanticism. It seems it's different, but this book talks about how that the power of the individual mind to observe emotions, inclination, or to see yourself objectively, that is a part of the way how we look at Buddhism. Okay, this may have been a little complicated, but we're running out of time here, so I want to go rather quickly. Again, I mentioned that Buddhism is a religion of awakening, not of belief, not believing in something that you cannot see. So that's why, we talked earlier about God. God is not a major issue in Buddhism. It's how we experience life and how to deal with what we are confronted with. The other point that we can emphasize again is Buddhism has made a difference in the history of Asia. I want to mention two things very quickly, and some of you already know this, but let me talk first about, when Japan lost the war, 1951, the San Francisco Peace Conference, where they drew up the peace treaty, there were many people on the winning side, including Russia, wanted to divide up Japan, or to demand a lot of reparation, having Japan pay a lot of money, pay for the damages. But if that had gone through, Japan would not be what it is today. I tell that to the Japanese young people. The benefits, the wealthy country that you now live in, it's because of what this Sri Lankan representative said at that meeting. His name is J.R. Jayawardene, who eventually became president, okay? And when this discussion heated up and they demanded reparation, money from Japan, he quoted from a Buddhist scripture, from the Dhammapada. He said, hatred is not overcome by hatred. Hatred is overcome only by love. And that supposedly changed, it's reported that it changed the flow of the discussion. And eventually those demands were taken down. So here we have a Buddhist quotation, a very sincere Buddhist at that, quoting a Buddhist scripture and changed the course of history. Another point, 1956, there are 200 outcasts in India today. They call them Dalits or Harijans or untouchables, right? Well, they're all part of the caste system or the whole system. They're out of the caste, but they're still part of that. 1956, the leader, his name is Bhimaro Ramji Ambedkar. Some of you know him. Ambedkar was Dr. Ambedkar, who was from the untouchable class. He was educated in London at Columbia University in New York, got his PhD, and helped to write the Constitution. But he was still a Dalit. He was still an untouchable. So he got fed up with Hinduism, the way they were being treated. So he converted in 1956 to Buddhism, because he saw Buddhism as a religion of equality and non-discrimination. And so today, there are, a lot of Buddhists, probably close to 1% now. There still is not a whole lot, but mostly all untouchables because of Ambedkar, because they feel that, it is a religion of non-discrimination. And I always talk about how there are three truths in all true religions, which is love and compassion. Second, equality, or treating people equally. And thirdly, teaching of oneness, interdependence. We are connected. And so in this time, needless to say, China and US are at odds with each other. I'm really hoping that nothing serious come out of this. If there is an incident in the South China Sea, it can lead to something more horrible. And because of the election in the US, our president is, stoking this kind of fear and hatred. But we need to go back to the true religions, espouse, non-discrimination and love and compassion. Okay, one other thing I wanted to point out is that I said, what do we pass on? We pass on Dharma. But sometimes the present Buddhist churches, especially Buddhist churches of America and Hawaii, you have temples that are going out of business, so to speak. There are no longer people who can, support it. The case of Spokane, Washington is an interesting one, that all the traditional Buddhists were no longer around, or there are very few left. They could not keep the temple. So they thought of closing it up, just abandon it, sell it. But they made a wise choice. They said, okay, we're going to leave this facility to anyone who is interested. So they opened it up, and lo and behold, many other people who were not traditional Buddhists, who were not, specifically not Japanese American Buddhists, and now it's predominantly made up of non-Japanese Americans, and it's doing quite well. And so it's an example of, don't shut your temples and close it down. Open it up, pass it on down to other people who want it. And, that's a treasure that we have for others who are interested. Okay, now we talk about why and what and who. So who passes the torch? Of course, the ministers play a great role, the priests, because they're the professionals. But one point I want to make is that they're not enough. They're not enough of them to really spend the time to promote the religion. So I think we should empower the lay people. Many of you who are well-educated, who know a lot, and they should be encouraged to write in the local newspapers and be the speakers. We in BCA, there are the minister's assistants who are doing a lot of this. And I think we need to have more people like that. We need to have more women become ministers. We need to have people who of various racial and ethnic traditions, backgrounds. Obviously, in China, when Buddhism first went to China, it was accepted by the non-Chinese people, non-Han people. It stayed that way for a couple hundred years. But eventually, it opened up to the general population, and only then it became a religion of the Chinese people. If it had stayed within the ethnic empires up north, it would have died out. But it was only in the around year 500 and into Tang period that it became a religion of the overall Han people. So the same thing has to be done. Okay, and then that's the who, and okay, to whom? Let's see. Okay, well, so I just talked about who passes on, and I emphasize the importance of lay people, and having. I feel like the importance of women becoming ministers, because they can actually talk about Buddhism with a different perspective. I find female teachers to be more down to earth. They talk about the more of the living issues of our lives, not about the traditions and how important that is. That's important, but we want people-centered, not the tradition-centered only. We have to have a balance. But, and I'll finish very quickly. The fourth one is to whom? And I already talked about this. To whom do we pass the torch? We pass it down to our kids and our grandchildren. but also to people in general, in the general society. And that this is obvious. But sometimes when we say pass the torch to the next generation, we're only thinking about our own kins and our relatives, but that is not the Buddhist spirit. Lastly, how do we pass the torch? And I think when we do it for our grandchildren and children, what is important are two things: conviction and knowledge, and especially conviction. And that manifests in the way we act. And I already talked about this, so I won't go on too much, but modeling children, especially grandchildren. In Japan, often people who are very interested in religion at their older age, you know what they talk about? The influence is not their parents so much, it's the grandparents, especially the grandmother. And so if you're a grandparent, I think that you have a greater role to impact. And again, I'm going to say it's not easy when you share with members of a family, but it's by you yourself being a sincere Buddhist in what we do. You know, I talked already about at meals, you put our hands together. We taught our kids to say, you know, Namo Amida Butsu, Itadakimasu, and then saying, thank you, mommy, for preparing the food. But, you know, we can take a moment longer than that and looking at the food and seeing, for example, if you saw a bacon, you try to think about the original form, which will be a live pig, okay? So that reminds you that as you're eating your bacon, that originally was a living being that you had to take in order for you to have that the bacon that you love. We're ultimately, you know, out for ourselves. That too is important for us to remember. So how to talk about the teachings to your kids? Actually talk about them, and not so much in terms of teachings, but talk about, you know how you can talk about, you know, I'm having some issues with getting old. You know, it's getting harder and harder. I'm getting a little foggy and things like that. But you can say something to the effect that, but you know, my religion, Buddhism, teaches that's the way things happen. That's natural. So I accept it. And I look back to all the things that made my life possible. The fact that I'm able to be a grandmother now, grandfather now, means that you live more than 60 years old. And that means that there are all these factors that made it possible, so I'm grateful. And just by sharing that thought to your grandchild, I bet that child will remember that for the rest of his or her life. So personal sharing, and that's the torch. You know, make yourself the lamp, make yourself the light. And so the question is, are you a light in the Dharma? And so just live it. And then finally, the other things about the technicalities of how to share the teachings with others. You know, SNS, all this, you know, advertise, and I, frankly speaking, are especially the traditional Buddhists, including the Jodo Shinshu Buddhists in America and in Canada. We do not, you know, advertise. We do not reach out as much as we should. I think that when we have, you know, talks like this, I think there should be a greater effort to, you know, share. And I know Dexter did a great job, but in most cases that it's kept within, and it's like a secret, you know, and that no wonder people back then thought Buddhism was a religion where you meditated staring at each other's navel. And so it's not, Buddhism isn't like that. And that's why we have to think more effectively of how to reach out. And so I talked about the why, what, who, whom, and how. So it's already written more in detail in the outline. But finally, once again, going back to the, the becoming a torch on, be a light onto yourself, or make myself the lamp, and then make the Dharma the lamp also. We rely on the Dharma to make ourselves the lamp. And then we take that torch, that lamp, that light, and pass it on, not in a forceful way or demanding way, always remembering the three things of being confident in the religion and being joyful, and then trying to be relevant to the needs of people. So we need to be person-centered, not only Dharma tradition-centered. So thank you. That concludes my second part. Okay, we have 15 minutes, not as much as we wanted, but well.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ken. Now we go into our kind of final question and answers. And if you want to ask him a question, please send me a chat, and I will then help you unmute. And you'll have your turn that way. Just to let you know that Dr. Tanaka will be staying for a Pauhana session after our formal closing at 4:15.
Dexter, you have to explain what Pauhana. It's a Hawaiian. I didn't even know.
Pauhana is after work is done. You get together. And so, it's basically another 30 minutes of, kind of informal conversations, with those of you that would like to, stay on and kind of chat with Professor Tanaka. But, we will, kind of have our regular closing, at the appointed hour of 4:15. So, I'm looking at the chats. We did have some other questions earlier that I put into the chat line for Dr. Tanaka. And I think we had something from Kimi Onikura. According to your book in Japanese, you mentioned that a number of Buddhists in the US are growing also globally, but seems like most likely Zen meditation type of Buddhism. What do you think about Shinshu futures in the United States? How are we going to approach the next generation? Anything we can learn from your teaching experience to young college students in Japan? So we'll start off with that as I wait for others to respond.
Well, it's true that the Buddhism that is growing, traditions, denominations that are growing, have a strong meditative tradition. So there are Zen, Theravada, or Southeast Asian form, and the third is Tibetan. They all have a well thought out, easy to access meditation. So for Jodo Shinshu, I think that because of the lack of a specific practice like that, it may not, it doesn't, is not as attractive. And of course, we know that it's often considered like Christianity. I often talk about how I was called a Christian Buddhist one time when I introduced myself at a Buddhist conference, and so that is true. So, but I think that without emphasizing any practice, Jodo Shinshu has elements that are very attractive. First of all, it's family religion. It's for the householder, because Shinran, as we said earlier, was the only householder or married clergy. And so we are open to children participating, and I think that part of it, it's a family religion, and that's something we can emphasize. And there are people who are interested in a Buddhist tradition that is that where the entire family can participate, and having services on Sundays. And so I think even if we didn't do anything new, anything different, but just welcoming people and being open to others, and just opening the door, I think there will be plenty of people who will take interest in Buddhism. I mean Shinshu. And in fact, there are many non-Japanese or non-Japanese Americans who have become ministers. Obviously, we saw Reverend Kaufman there. And amongst the ministers' assistants in the BCA, I understand we have about 200 of them. I think more than half, at least half, are non-Japanese Americans. So you already see that you don't have to have meditation to be attractive. It's just that we haven't really pitched ourselves as much. And now I think that the teaching that you are accepted just as you are, that teaching without any judgment, that teaching has been very appealing to a lot of people. And there's some people here who have converted to Shinshu, and they attest to that. There's no judgment. It's unconditional embrace, but that is something. It's a high level of awakening, because one has to actually. Well, it's not for everyone. I'm not saying that we all have to do this, but Shinran Shonin spent 20 years as a monk, what we called in a self-styled, self-powered manner, and he couldn't find the answer. And at 29, he found the answer in the teaching of other power. But that was made possible because he had made that effort. So my take on Shinshu, now if you don't have to change anything, my take on Shinshu is that we should talk more about what we can do, not simply accept the compassion of Amida, or just simply reciting the Nembutsu. So, but this is not to say it's self-powered. It's like Shinran, 20 years of Shinran. He's kind of, tilling the soil for the seed to take roots. And so I think that element of questioning and doubting and searching is important part of Buddhism. Buddhism is a religion of awakening. It takes some effort to awaken. Shinshu is not a couch potato Buddhism. No, do nothing. We're sometimes, or Shin Buddhists are sometimes called do nothing Buddhists, but that's not true. I mean, in fact, so we do emphasize listening. So I think we have to listen. So which means that we ministers have to tell good sermons. We have to give good sermons, So we often say, listen to the teaching. But I hear some lay people say, yeah, we try to, but it puts us to sleep. Not all the time, of course, but so we have to make effort on our part. So we can do, Nembutsu contemplation that I talked about. So that is why when I go speak, even in Japan, in fact, in a conservative part of Japan, to a bunch of ministers, you know what I did? I had them do Nembutsu meditation, and I knew that I would get criticism, and I did get some criticism, some pushback. But I said, look at Shinran, and what they say often is, well, we know what his conclusion is, other power. We don't have to do anything. I said, yeah, well, that's a conclusion, but what's the 20 years of Mount Hiei? What are you doing? And then, the Gomonshu recently came up with a new set of teachings. They're very simply our pledge or my pledge. I don't know if some of you know that. And that one, and some of them criticize that. The Gomonshu, His Eminence, the leader of our tradition, didn't like it. And I said, why? He says, well, it says we have to be like the Buddha, And I said, well, the Monshu is teaching us what is the ideal. If you don't know what an ideal is, you don't know what good is, then how do you know when you realize that you cannot fulfill it completely, which was his conclusion, right? We are foolish ordinary beings. We could not fulfill all those demands. But he was able to come to that realization because he made the effort. So I think we have to make a distinction between self-effort and self-power. Self-power is what we don't want, is the idea that my action will lead to enlightenment. I'm taking credit, I'm being boastful. Well, that's the opposite of enlightenment. You're not humble, you're not, But self-effort is any activity that we do for self-reflection and to ultimately come to realize how far we are from the ideals of Buddhism. And that is an important part of awakening, the realization that we are imperfect. Okay, so I'll stop at that.
Okay, the next question comes from Dave Atchison.
Hello, Dr. Tanaka. Thank you very much for your lectures. And I think this question actually follows along fairly well from the previous discussion there. It's a question about engaged Buddhism. And I think it's prompted largely by a couple of things, but one of them being the recent passage of John Lewis, who was basically in a way, kind of the receiver of the torch, although he and Martin Luther King Jr. were kind of carrying the torch simultaneously. But he was the youngest speaker at the March in Washington. And by the time he was 19, he was already super engaged. And teenagers younger than him were some of those that really accelerated in the civil rights movement, the progress towards change. And sometimes they were running out ahead of kind of the elders of the movement who played a bit of catch up. Anyway, as we look at the Black Lives Matter movement and the demonstrations in the streets and the young people getting engaged, I've been following some editorializing and some postings on the BCA website, as well as the message of our own bishop here in Hawaii and through the Young Buddhist editorial. I just would ask you to maybe comment a little bit. I realize you've probably been in Japan this whole time during the coronavirus and the recent Black Lives Matter demonstrations on the street. Yeah. But if you could just comment on kind of a Buddhist perspective, if young people come to you and say, what are your thoughts on me getting involved in this particular effort or sort of that kind of activism? So I guess I'll leave it at that. I'm one of the chants that you hear is no justice, no peace. And I've asked this of more than one minister, but part of my question you could respond to would be about the nature of peace and how much that requires, from a Buddhist perspective, that true peace also be underlaid by justice. So anyway, big question, I know.
Okay, I'll take a shot. I said earlier that 3 of the principles of true religion are love and compassion, equality, or treating people equally, or treating people so that we realize that each person has equal worth. And then lastly is interconnectedness or oneness, that we are all interconnected. So those 3, so at the top we have love and compassion and love, real caring, and then equality. So Black Lives Matter and what has been going on in the U.S. Is an example of certain group of people not having been treated equally. And so as a Buddhist, I think that efforts to rectify the wrong should be a no-brainer. You know, I really think that if you saw that George Floyd being killed at the hands of the police and not be moved by it, then there is something wrong with you. I will say that. If you cannot be moved and say, this is wrong, you know, you don't treat people, another human being, that way. And so I myself, in fact, I was gonna, if it was no pandemic now, I wanted to go to the American consulate in Tokyo, the embassy, and demonstrate there. I would have done that, but I figure, I have to care for my health and my wife's health and all that. So I think that if you're Buddhist, and again, the action that we take in the world will have to be left up to the individual, that we cannot dictate to all Buddhists that since we believe in equality, that you should take certain action. So other people's act, but what is important is, how about you? How do you feel? What are you going to do about it? And that can take a different form. So this is one of the issues with religious organization. And I know that you're not asking about organization. We have had many issues, social issues in the past, in the Buddhist Church of America, that people felt agreed basically on certain issues, but they could not agree on what actions to take. So anyway, I think that the best thing is for us to think in terms of first person, self, make yourself the lamp. And so if a young person who comes to me and says, well, what should I do as a Buddhist? Then, think about it. Your understanding of Buddhism. What do you think about it? And if you feel outraged, if you feel that, we need to work for justice, by all means. And there are plenty of reasons, doctrinally and teaching-wise, to support your action. But just don't be disappointed that other Buddhists will not, follow in the same course. But I would think that traditionally in Asia, the emphasis has been on mental tranquility and peace of mind. But I feel like if the aim of Buddhism is to reduce suffering, it's not just mental suffering, but it's also the social conditions that lead to suffering. So, we have to do what we can to reduce the causes of suffering. But traditional Buddhism has not gone that far, even though now, even in Asia, there are many actions like that, what we call engaged Buddhism. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yes, thank you very much. That helps a lot.
Okay.
Okay, our next question comes from Angela.
Angela, good.
Oh, hi, Tanaka Sensei.
Let me tell Angela is from Brazil. So I'm glad.
Yes.
Actually, she's a minister of the Honganji Shin tradition. So Reverend Andrade or Angela?
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Good to see you too. Thank you for your talk. Good to hear you. And in your broad perspective on how to pass the torch, I was thinking about, some translation that I'm involved with, and I think it's so important in terms of passing the torch. And I wonder what you could talk about. The importance of translation and to Portuguese language, and it's what I've been doing, but for many languages.
Okay.
As a way, of course, of passing the torch also.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. Passing the torch involves the many ways, translating into different languages. And Angela has been involved in translating mostly Shin materials, Jodo Shinshin material into Portuguese. In fact, she's completed a translation of my Ocean book Ocean, Introduction to Jodo Shinshin Buddhism. She's just completed it, so hopefully you'll be published soon. So, of course, Xuanzang, who is a famous monk in the 7th century China. You know about him. He's traveled for 17 years, went back to India from China to retrieve all these scriptures and spent the rest of his life translating. And because of that, we had so many activities and teachers who came out of it. And BDK, that published my book, this present book, is doing, amongst many projects, is translating, the Taisho Tripitaka, the canon, the Buddhist canon, the huge canon. There are 100 volumes. Each volume has 1,000 pages, and we're translating the first 139 into English. And I'm involved in that project. And so, that is an important part of passing the torch, because, I talked about relevance. If people cannot read it, then the teaching cannot be transported, and so passed on. So Angela has done such a great job in helping with the translation of Shin material. Yes, that's good. I'm glad you pointed it out. So different ways of, I would say even cleaning the garden at the temple voluntarily. That is helping to transport, helping at the bazaar, But the point is that while you clean a garden and you help at the bazaar, you also attend the services and the study classes, or learn, or do anything to learn, and so that you understand the teaching for yourself, for your conviction and knowledge. Okay.
Okay, we have a question from Alan Kubota, who's from Hawaii Betsuin.
Okay.
This is Alan. Technology has made this such an instant society. Passing the torch of Buddhism does not necessarily provide an instant result / gratification. How may we address this generation's need for speed?
Well, anything that has good and a bad, but definitely the technology has many positives. So you can reach many people like we're doing today in different parts of the world. And, but I think it has to, as you say, it has to be followed up by, more quality interaction that, if someone learns about Buddhism or your temple, they come, then you have to make a concerted effort to reach out to that person, make it more meaningful and make it personable for that person. So now I think you're making comment about people in general, how they want gratification. But I think that it is true that people want gratification, and there'll be people who are impatient. And I know there are many people who come to temples and they just visit once or 2 or 3 times and they're gone. And that's, you can't help. You can't help. But we have to make sure that if they did come, that you do the best to give quality time and to make them welcome. They can tell if you're just, going through the motion. So I think that if you are interested in passing the torch to new people, then, as I just said, utilize the internet, the digital world, because, they can do things that we couldn't do before. But also we have to follow that up by more quality kind of interaction and sincerity and a sense of conviction. And remember that so that they can see that you're having fun and joyful, and that it's worthy. So I don't know if I answered your question, but if you can follow, if you want to follow up.
Okay. We had a question from Kazumi Kuruma, I believe probably from Japan.
Okay.
I now learn many younger American people became Buddhist and are interested in Buddhism through mindfulness meditation, Zen, and essential or common to all denominations Buddhism teachings. How do they feel about Jodo Shinshu, which tends to be considered similar to Christianity that they escaped from?
Yeah. So I kind of alluded or talked about this earlier. The interest in Jodo Shinshu is not as strong as in those others. That is clear in terms of numbers. But there are enough people who are interested. And actually, I kind of answered much of this, so I don't want to repeat myself. But so the last part of the question was, how, Dexter, can you read it again? The last part?
I guess, how do they feel about Jodo Shinshu, which tends to be considered similar to Christianity that they escaped from?
Yeah, well, actually, many people don't know much about Jodo Shinshu. You know, they have kind of a casual understanding that it is, as you say, like Christianity, or it's a religion for the populace, or it's more devotional, and that. It actually, that's why we have a huge task to really convey Buddhism in the broader world. And those who understand do understand, but it is far and few between. So I think that is what many of us are trying to do, to present Buddhism, Jodo Shinshu, in accurately and in an inviting and appealing way. But I think if we present it traditionally, it will not be appealing. It has to take a different approach in terms of teaching. And but again, institutionally, I think the teaching of the family, for the family, householder, that is appealing. So, but I think that for young people who want to do things, they may feel somewhat inadequate, or that the teaching is not inadequate because it doesn't have clear-cut practice and meditation. But that's where, and I earlier talked about how we can innovate in presenting the teaching. Okay, so since I talked about it quite a bit earlier, so that I'll keep it at that. Thanks for the question.
Okay, I have no further questions. So the microphone is open for anybody that would like to have a shot at it.
Okay. There's June Masayama.
Yes. I just have a couple comments here. I think with the shelter in place that we've been, for the past 4 months, most of the ministers in California, I think, are doing their services online or YouTube or whatever. So I think I'm assuming that people, not just members, but just people out there are looking for something, maybe religious or whatever, something to make them feel good. And so I think I'm thinking there's a really good possibility that there may be a lot of people who are not Buddhists or are not going to Buddhist churches, may be interested after all this is over, whenever that's going to be. And I think, like you were talking, it's really important that if they decide that they want to come and visit our temple because they liked the sermons that they heard, then I think we really need, as members, we really need to work really hard to make them to invite them and be friendly and be excited and be welcoming. So that's just my one statement. And the other is, I grew up going to church in the 50s and 60s because my family was Buddhists, and so it was not anything that I had to really think about. And I think back then too, there was a reason to go there because my friends were there and it was fun. And life is really different now. I have grandkids and I don't know how to get them to church. So how do I do that?
Well, part of getting the young people to church, as I said earlier, 40% of the young people and probably even more, they may be affiliated, but they just don't have the time.
That's what it is.
And the lifestyle has changed so much, so that's why we have to change the way we think about how people relate to the church or the temple. I've been saying what's called one-dimensional affiliation, in other words, or participation. Rather than having one person become a member and be expected to do a lot of things, you will not get the young people to do that anymore, I think. But if you can have one activity that they're interested in, and so then they will participate in that activity, and in that way they're affiliated with a temple. And then,
because I think, it's the way it was in the past was we went to church for, like I said, social reasons or whatever. It's really changed over the past 20 years or whatever, where people want to come to our church. They want to learn about the religion, which is really different from the way it was 40 years ago.
Yes, so that is, we're talking also about phenomenon of ethnic group relying on a religion for their social and cultural needs. But those needs have almost disappeared. And so we have to make the transition to really becoming a religious organization. So in that regard, I think that at the temple, you have different committees. I bet you that your bazaar committee has more money and more people involved than the religious education committee. Right? And so what I'm saying is that we should really want new people to come and participate. You have to really develop that religious education part, or the membership committee, and work in tandem, and that have people ready to meet people, not in an aggressive way, but in a welcoming way. But I don't see that the effort is made equally.
It's changing. I think temples are really changing, especially in the Bay Area, because we do have, like, in the mornings, Sunday mornings when we used to have services, we would have coffee and refreshments half an hour before service started. So it was good.
Yeah. Good. Well, anything, like, things of that nature.
Right.
So I think that the next 10 years is very critical. And I will say some temples will survive and even flourish, and but others may not. And before they close down, make sure to pass on the temple to other people who are interested. Yeah, don't cling on to it. Yeah, that's attachment. Okay, thanks. Good to see you.
Yeah, as I think as good Buddhists, we can try to adapt and look at this COVID-19, kind of situation as an opportunity. And for instance, with our summer session, our Buddhist Study Center summer session with Duncan Williams a few weeks ago, we had as many as 3,200 viewers. So it was, a grand exposure, to things that we are doing. And of course, we need to use this time to, kind of improve ourselves. And, when perhaps people, come to our temples, or, if they, kind of explore our websites. Dave Atchison does a great job with our Hawaii Betsuin website to not only share the history and the teachings, but, kind of also the face of our temple and the activities that happen. So, those are all kind of things to leverage at this point. So we don't have any more questions from folks. And so I think it's, our time is up. So Dr. Tanaka, would you like to?
Aho Umitani here. Are you here? If you're here, can you?
Hello, hi.
Oh, okay, you are. Okay, good. I'm glad that some young people are here. And thanks again for editing the book. And please do what you can. Do you have any last quick comment about, since we're talking about you guys and you have to probably speak for yourself. Anything, can you share some thoughts?
Well, there's definitely been a cultural shift in the perception, or I think as we move on to this new generation, we have to also, while introducing new members and gaining new membership, we also need to fix or teach people the true meaning of Buddhism. I often when I talk to friends or people who don't know much about Buddhism, they often have a certain mindset or perspective of what they think Buddhism is. So there's a lot of stereotypes and like misinformation about it. Like, oh, you're vegan. Oh, you have to shave your head. So those stereotypes. We also need to, as we move forward, we should try to educate more people to the true meaning of Buddhism, and not just like what's shown on media and stuff like that. Or that's just my take.
No, well, that's your take, and that's very important. So, again, that's your torch, and please pass on that torch in the ways you have just talked. Okay. All right. Thank you. And I think so. If anyone wants to remain afterwards, and I may take out my wine and nibble on that, or sip on that as we talk for another half an hour. Okay, so Dexter, I turn it over to you.
Okay, so thank you everyone very much for attending the 21st Bloom-Futaba Memorial Lectures. Hope you enjoyed it, and please be patient. Thank you for your understanding about our technical struggles as we learn how to do all this. But and thank you to Dr. Tanaka for coming to us all the way from Tokyo. So just put our hands together for those of you who wish to, and we can just close this part of the meeting with Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namanda, Namanda, Namanda.
Namanda, Namanda, Namanda.
So thank you all. The Pauhana time, like Dr. Tanaka says, one of our traditions at our summer session is that once it's over, we do get around and have wine and beer and be very informal and just chat. So those of you who wish to stay on and just talk about what's happening in Japan or elsewhere are welcome to. So we'll do that for about half an hour. Okay. Aloha.